Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge. I'm Patty Roberts from St. Mary's University School of Law, and today's guests include John Goldberg. He's the Morgan and Helen Chu Dean and Professor of Law at Harvard Law School, and Barry Friedman. He is the Jacob D. Fuchsberg Professor of Law from New York University. Welcome.
Great to be here.
Good to be here.
I'm delighted to have you both on because I know you have a new edition of a book that law students just starting out, or either JDs or LLMs or law students continuing, may find very helpful. And so I thought we'd talk a little bit about that today. The book is Open Book, Succeeding on Law School Exams from Day One. It's an Aspen publishing book, and you've just released your third edition.
That's right.
So the two of you started this book some time ago, and I'd love to just know why you decided to write it originally and why you have had subsequent editions.
I think I'm probably the right one to jump in on why we wrote it. I have for years given a talk to law students about how to take law school exams. The talk was titled The Pinball Theory of Exam Taking, and I actually started tutoring students when I was still a law student. And one day I gave the talk, and one of my students walked into my office later that day and said, "Why don't you write a book?" And so
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was. He said, "Nobody ever tells us this. Why don't you write this down?" And so I reached out to John, who had been my colleague at Vanderbilt, and John has taught a huge number of the 1L courses, particularly on the private law side. I do a lot of public law. And so a marriage was born, and so was the book.
Outstanding. So what year was that when you started with the first book?
Oh, gosh, it's been a while.
We will find the answer to that question while we are.
I'm going to guess 2008 or 9.
Oh, okay. So it has been some time. And so you did a second edition, and now you have just released this third edition, and you have added another co-author.
Yes, Maria Ponomarenko from the University of Texas, who's a terrific scholar and teacher, award-winning teacher, and a former student of Professor Friedman. And Maria has brought a real energy and new perspective to the book that has made this edition even better.
She's not the one who suggested you write the book at first, is she, Professor Friedman?
No, she. This was long before she was my student, but she, in fact, used the book as a law student and thought well of it. And throughout her time in teaching, and she's won a number of teaching awards, has drawn on the book in terms of her slides and telling students how to go about taking exams. And so when it came time to do a third edition, we thought to ask her. And I think she was a huge contributor. And I'll just point to two things I think she did really well with this book. One is streamlined it. People don't have the same patience or time to read, as you might have noticed. And the other is we've done a little focus group activity, and there was a real interest for more in the way of exercises or examples for students. And, Maria did a really good job of basically bringing the classroom alive with actual legal problems and seeing how they get discussed in the classroom and then how that turns into law school exam questions.
Terrific. Well, I'm sorry she couldn't be here, but I appreciate your sharing some of the contributions that she made. I'm intrigued by the pinball. What was the pinball method of law school exams? That was the impetus behind this kind of approach to exams. So if you'll share a little bit about that method, how you started thinking about it, and then how you incorporated it into this book to make it a unique approach for law students to consider in preparing for exams.
Sure. So let me take two shots at that, and then John can do better. So, what I think is completely unique about this book, and we hear this all the time from students, is that it demystifies the process of law school by connecting three things that you don't usually see connected together. One is what's happening in class. One is what's expected to happen on exams. But the third surprising one is what's expected in the practice of law. And we orient the entire book around here's what's going to happen when you're a lawyer. And it explains then why the skills you're being taught, or some of them in law school, are really germane. As for the pinball part, if you've ever played pinball, or anybody who's ever played pinball, you know that you only score points when you hit the bumpers, and the bumpers aren't all equal. They have different points assigned to them. And I think we've all had that experience of people writing what they thought were brilliant exams that were, with big theories of the law, but they weren't answering the question. And the whole point of the pinball theory of exam taking and a core of the book is we're going to tell you what the bumpers are. And if you're not hitting the bumpers, you're just not getting points.
That's a great analogy. I'm
Thank
going to
you.
be
Thank you.
suggesting this book to our own students. Okay, so the pinball method goes in, and why is this book unique?
Well, I think for some of the reasons Barry said, which is we really do try to explain the whys of law school. Why does law school class work the way it does? Why do exams, at least the classic issue spotter exams, look so different from what we're being asked to do day to day in preparing for class? How do we connect those two things? And as we explain in the book, law professors who've been doing this forever, and by the way, tended to do pretty well in law school, find all of this very intuitive, but that's why they're law professors. Law students, most of them aren't going to be law professors, and so this is explaining things that at some level are very basic, but nonetheless often do not get explained, and once they are explained, can illuminate for students why they're doing what they're doing, and that in turn helps them to understand what's expected of them. So that's a big part of the pedagogy of the book. And another big part is we try to be very down to earth and even a little bit funny at times. It's designed to be a book that, while nobody would pick it up as a bestseller to read on the beach, is actually a pretty pleasant experience. We even have some wonderful hand-drawn cartoons by a former Harvard Law student, Claire Sooney, who's a brilliant illustrator. And again, the point is to make this approachable, accessible, and less scary than law school often strikes a lot of entering law students.
So you mentioned entering law students. Is that who you would recommend this book for the most? Is this meant to be kind of a pre-law school book? Or is it something that when a student maybe didn't do as well as they wanted to their first semester, they could turn to?
Yeah, all of the above, but let me tell you a little bit of the history of the book. We wrote it thinking that people would read it during their first semester. And one of the lessons that we learned was that people get really busy really fast. And so we reoriented the book and have continued to do that. John said it's not going to be beach reading, but at some level, it's great beach reading. People write us all the time and say, I'm headed to law school. What should I read? And it's a very approachable, as John said, sometimes funny book. But one great time to read it is before it all starts so that you're tuned into what's going to happen. Now, we also, we give the students a calendar in the book. We suggest focusing in on different parts when it becomes germane. Now's time to start outlining for finals. Now's the time to focus on practice exams. And then we have regularly done Zoom sessions or been to other schools where we show up in January and we do a little debugging exercise saying, okay, it might not have gone how you hoped it would go. Let's talk about the few things that go wrong. So I think all of that is a possibility. But we do think that, the sooner you read it in the first semester, and it's not a hard read, the better you're going to understand what's going on.
If I can just embellish on what Barry said. First, the book is very methodical about telling students when to read different parts of it, so it doesn't all have to be consumed in one big chunk if students don't have the time or the energy. And then the other thing I'll say is there's another audience here too, which is LLM students. Part of what the book aims to do is to explain some of the basics of the U.S. legal system, and we've had good success, and we've heard of students having good success in LLM programs using this to kind of help them orient themselves to what American sort of style legal education is as compared to some other modes of legal education.
I'm sure that was invaluable to LLM students. When I think about a book that would be helping to succeed on law school exams, I think about exams that are essay exams. Does the book cover anything related to multiple choice questions?
It does. So you're right. The main focus of the book is on the classic sort of issue spotter exam because that's still the predominant mode of examination in most law schools. But we have a segment on a range of other kinds of questions or a chapter, including multiple choice questions, which of course students are going to eventually face if they take the bar exam, as well as sort of policy questions that are less about find the issues buried in the facts and more about sort of big think topics that may have been raised in a given class. And then we also have some advice on sort of shorter essay questions that I think are increasingly popular among some law professors. So the student who reads this will be well equipped to handle any different kind of question they're likely to see.
That's outstanding. I wish I had a book like this when I was in law school.
We actually hear that all the time.
Yeah, we've heard that a lot.
Yeah.
So As far as the open book Succeeding on Law School Exams from Day One, third edition, I'd love to know what has changed. What can people be looking forward to? And maybe somebody who's read the second edition who might wonder, should I pick up the third edition and take a look at that?
So one thing that both has changed and hasn't, and I want to stress it because I do think it's one of the most unique things about the book, is between the first and second editions, from hearing from students, a light bulb went off over our head. Students complain all the time that law school exams don't look like the practice of law. And as I've said, we disabuse people of that notion. We explain how clients come into your office and tell stories, and it's your job to convert them into law, and that is what your typical issue spotter is. But we realize that there's something else that confuses law students, and they're right, which is that in your classic case method law school classroom, what students aren't taught to do is spot issues. They're taught to get the rule, they're taught to answer hypotheticals, they're taught to draw some sort of conclusion, three of the important elements of IRAC. But because the issue is already in each case, they never learn how to do issue spotting. And so we have always focused in the book on how to become a good issue spotter, because that is the critical skill in exams. If you can't spot the issue, you don't get any other points, you don't hit any other bumpers. But in this third edition, and with much credit to Maria, we actually take a classroom and we do the give and take around a problem and show how that is evident already in the case, but then later in the book, we show how when you just get a fact pattern, you have to turn things inside out and figure out, first of all, what's the issue. And that is a big and important part of the book.
Yeah, and I'll add a couple of other things, which is we've gotten a lot of feedback, which we're grateful for and which has been hugely helpful. The book is dedicated to our students, both because we've learned so much from them throughout the years, and also they've given us great feedback on the book. And one of the bits of feedback we got, not surprising, was it'd be great if you could have more examples and walk us through more model answers. So we've devoted a lot more time, even though the book is overall shorter, we've devoted a lot more time to walking students through what makes a good exam answer a good exam answer. So we give a model answer and then break it down and say, here's why this is good. Here's why a professor will give you points for this. So we walk students through that. The other thing is, without taking too heavy a hand, because everything's so moving so quickly, we acknowledge the relevance of new technology, including, of course, AI, and give the students some advice on best practices for the ways in which AI can really help them, but also ways in which probably use of AI won't help them. I have students who rightly say, well, AI can write all the briefs from my class. What should I use it? And I say, no, you're missing the point. The point of a briefing is not to have the brief. The point is to write the brief. And so advice like that hopefully is relevant in 2026 and beyond.
Well, and I think that advice is so critical because, of course, AI would spot the issues for you every time. And if you don't learn to spot the issues yourself, you'll never hit those bumpers, as you said. When you think about AI, what is it you're recommending in the book that students do use it for?
Well, there's a number of things, and obviously a lot depends on the schools and the professors' particular policies about use of AI. So that's by the way, a recurring theme in the book is we have lots of great advice, but at the end of the day, the school and the professor sets the rules and the parameters for the exam, and so of course you've got to focus on that. But assuming it's permissible, you could use AI, for example, to generate hypotheticals to test your understanding. You can use AI to review one of your own draft answers to a sample exam. We emphasize throughout the book the importance of taking practice exams, which students, of course, as you know, hate to do because it's deeply unpleasant, but you got to do it. And so if you do, sometimes when you do a sample exam, there may not be a model answer around, or maybe you don't have a study group or whatever. Go ahead and plug both the sample exam and your answer into AI. And it's not that AI is going to be a perfect grader of your exam, but it'll give you some feedback that will help you spot some weaknesses.
Those are some good suggestions. And I love that you're giving a lot of examples to students, because seeing how you can, I imagine you diagram the paragraphs and they're able to see where the issues are, what's just irrelevant, that kind of thing. But as far as the book and its preparation for exams, is it also, do you think, helpful in moving students towards the next gen bar that's coming down the pipeline? And if so, why?
It's a good question. I think it is. There's obviously debates about how dramatically different next gen is from previous gen. It's certainly different, and I think in ways that are good because it brings the bar a little closer to practice, which is desirable. As Barry said at the outset, the fact that the book is all about explaining why some of the abstract stuff that goes on in the law school classroom that seems on its face at first blush utterly disconnected to anything a lawyer might actually do really is connected to what lawyers do. So why am I reading an 1870 Illinois case about the sale of wheat? I'm never going to have a case like that. What am I doing here? Well, turns out you're doing something that's directly relevant when your client walks in the door and doesn't ask you about wheat, but instead asks you about Bitcoin. It's going to be a lot of the same stuff. So our emphasis on connection between classroom exams and the practice of law, I think, is very compatible with the next gen, the aspirations of the next gen bar.
Well, and that's exactly where I was going to go next. You indicated that the book talks about what happens in class, what happens in exams, and they should prepare for, and then the connection to the practice of law. So in addition to issue spotting, what other connections do you make in the book with the practice of law?
So, I'll just draw out a couple. I'll start back with issue spotting because I think this is so critical, and it is the thing that students don't really comprehend at first, which is, it doesn't matter what your practice setting is. You're at a big law firm, you're at a small storefront, you're working in a public interest organization, in a corporation. No matter what happens, as you know, Patty, someone's going to walk in your door, whether it's a client or a boss or whatever, and they're just going to tell you a story. And we make the point early on that often when those people walk in your door, they don't talk about promissory estoppel or the elements of whatever. They just tell a story.
Yeah.
And it's your job to listen to that story and hear it and translate it into law so that you can then know what are the client's struggles and what to deal with them. And so we start the book there and we say, this must seem weird because you haven't even started law school, but it will all make so much more sense if you can fast forward to when you're actually sitting in an office being a lawyer. And then, there's the things that we all tell students that they have a very hard time hearing and we really drill, which is nobody's asking you for a certain answer. There usually aren't going to be certain answers. And you really have to get used to the discomfort of understanding that it's all about arguments and not answers. And we do that by just talking about law that they watch on television, which is, what makes law interesting on television is you have two sides and they're arguing with each other and they both have a good argument. And so the point is, when you're out there as a lawyer, sure, sometimes you're going to get questions that have slam dunk clear answers, but most of the time you're going to have to talk to your client and say, this has a decent chance of winning, but I can't guarantee that, or this is probably not the best argument. And really trying to understand that law is a thing about probabilities and about how a decision maker is going to evaluate the different arguments. And again, by focusing on the practice of law, all this becomes much more tangible and understandable instead of kind of walking into the room and have somebody tell you, well, don't look for answers. Like you'd be thinking, why not? I just spent a lot of money to come here and get some answers. So we explain, why that's the case.
I imagine some of the things that you can point out to them too is that unlike TV, there's likely not going to be a trial, and two, it won't be resolved in like one day's worth of 60-minute episodes. But
yes, we do.
The other piece I wanted to ask you about was faculty. Do you get feedback from faculty who know their students use the book or recommend it to students? Or could it even be useful to new faculty who are trying to design exams and classroom pedagogy?
You asked that question at a particularly interesting moment and sort of a touching one, which is I, for years, have run a program at NYU to train law students who are interested to become law professors. And we've made a lot of law professors out there in the world. So as the third edition was coming out, I just shamelessly wrote them all and said, be happy if you said a kind thing about our book. And so many of them have written me back and said that they actually call it out on their syllabus for their 1L classes. So I was super touched to hear that. And then I'll mention something that's maybe a little bit more negative about faculty, but interesting, which is, one of my hectoring things that I do is I just don't have much patience for law professors who don't give sample answers and feedback to their exams to the students.
You and
they
me
just
both.
I mean, it's, we have good jobs and they're not that hard and we get paid okay, if not really well. And the idea that you're going to give an exam and then not give people the tools to understand how they did or why they did badly or well just seems unconscionable to me. There's a big word everybody will learn early on in law school. And I just tell the students, you should go to the professors and tell them I, Barry Friedman, think they should start handing out feedback because I just think it's so critical. It's very hard to learn, even if you're doing the hard work of taking practice exams, if nobody's telling you how you did.
One other thing in this space, which is when we wrote the first edition, we actually contacted, I don't know, a dozen or so law professors and asked them to prepare, based on past exams they had given, sort of marked up versions of the past exams to sort of basically in part to test whether the advice we were giving is corresponded to what these faculty members thought made for good exam answers. And we were relieved and pleased to see that what we said resonated with them. So from the get-go, the book in its DNA has had a lot of input from faculty across the country. Worried because Barry and I and Maria are all at pretty fancy law schools, and we worried a little bit that book, it would be tempting from the credentials of the authors to sort of write it off as a little bit highbrow or whatever. But our goal was very much to reach every entering law student, and we wanted input from a lot of faculty at a lot of different schools to make sure that we weren't communicating in a way that unconsciously was reflecting sort of problems or features of super elite law schools that don't show up elsewhere.
Well, that's good to know. We are a largely first-gen, majority Hispanic institution, and so I'm glad that it is equally relevant to all students in their journey, no matter where their law school is. As far as enticing students to take a look at this book, our incoming students and those preparing for law school across the country, would you each suggest one particular tip that you put in the book that might be a teaser to interest them? You don't have to give away the ending.
No worries. One I've already mentioned, and again, a lot of this, to be clear, a lot of this is not exactly rocket science in the sense of faculty out there who've thought about helping students with exam will have thought about a lot of these things, but we think we've put it out at all in a pretty accessible, systematic way. But one of the lessons early on is outlining and practice exams, the age-old advice that we all got from at least some of our professors as law students, and which is tempting to sort of dismiss because it's a pain in the butt to do those outlines and to take those practice exams. We hammer again and again and again, you've really got to do them, and you've got to not just do them, you got to do them well and correctly. And we give lots of guidance on how to do a good version of outlining and a good version of practice exams.
Yeah, I'm actually going to hit on the same point in a slightly different way. First, I just want to point out, we hear from students all over the country at all kinds of law schools. And we've gone to all kinds of law schools. In fact, one thing we've told folks at Aspen, and we're about to write a bunch of academic success folks, is if you buy a bunch of books for your school, we will either through Zoom or in person show up and actually do a session for all of your students. And we have done that in lots of places. But one of the analogies
Dean is happy to hear that.
We like to talk to students, and they always have useful things to say. One of the most pragmatic things that we say, and this originally I think came from John a couple of editions ago, but is this analogy with, like, let's say you want to get stronger. So you can read a book about doing push-ups. You can get somebody to do your push-ups for you. But the only way you're actually going to get stronger is to do your push-ups. And there's not yes, we have interesting metaphors like the pinball metaphor, and we have a bunch of other metaphors in the book that I hope make it entertaining and interesting. But we say early on, there's no secret tricks we're going to tell you. This is not rocket science. And one of the unfortunate facts about this is you're going to go to law school and people are going to tell you, you don't really have to do that. Don't bother briefing your cases. You can just look on the internet, or, outlining is a waste of time. You don't have time to outline because you got to learn this stuff. And the constant theme in this book is no. It's by briefing the cases and by doing the outlining that you're actually learning to be a really good lawyer. And so we're sympathetic. We are there to help students. The tone of the book is warm and friendly, but we're actually pretty direct in saying you just got to put in the work.
That's really interesting. We have challenges with bar passage, and we had had great results last year relative to the last decade or so. And ultimately, I have alums asking me all the time, like, well, what'd you do? And we did like 25 different things. But at the end of the day, the students just have to do the work. I mean, there's no way around it, right? There's no easy path. I have tried reading about doing push-ups for a long time, and it has not helped me a bit.
My preferred method of exercise. That's why I thought of the example.
Yeah, you and me both.
But
Okay.
Patty, I just want to say a point we want to make is if you're in trouble and you go to a lawyer, you don't want the lawyer that read about push-ups. You want the lawyer that did them. And that we want students to be the person that is the lawyer they would want to see if they were in trouble.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think doing all the issue spotting is especially important. I had reason to meet with someone recently about particular legal issues. And boy, you just peel away the onion. You're like, wait, what? There's a bankruptcy? Wait, there's somebody else who's in another state that like it just goes on and on. And you kind of forget when you're not practicing that like people don't come in and like you said and say, I have a promissory estoppel issue. And you really have to dig.
Another thing we point out is that even the simplest examples actually in law can be really complicated. We have a couple of sort of one paragraph fact patterns, and it's amazing how many issues you can cram into a one paragraph fact pattern if you try.
The kitchen sink method, right? All right. Well, thank you both for telling us more about the third edition of Open Book, Succeeding on Law School Exams from Day One. That's with Aspen Publishing. And before we conclude, I'd love to get feedback from both of you on what your predictions are for the future of legal education in the coming decade. Who wants to go first?
Well, I think the dean among us should go first, and then I'll be glad to criticize everything that the dean says if I think he's wrong.
Sounds like the typical dean-faculty relationship.
I have to agree.
So obviously these are really interesting times for the legal profession, and as a result, legal education. Change is definitely afoot. I don't think anybody knows exactly where it's going. I've heard 20 different opinions from 20 different informed observers. So prediction is hazardous, but I'll say something which is the technology is going to change how we teach, how we learn, how we practice, but I don't think at the end of the day it's going to change fundamentally what it means to learn the law and what it means to give legal advice, whether you're reviewing an associate's memo or Claude's AI-generated memo. You're still going to have to understand it and analyze it and figure out whether it actually fits the circumstances of the situation in front of you. So I'm pretty confident that legal education and law practice will remain the sort of noble and exciting professions they've always been.
That's good to hear. Thanks, John. Barry?
I think John is actually exactly right about the core thing I would say. I'll tell you a story. I had over to dinner the other night a partner at a large law firm who was saying, they're getting whipsawed in the sense that their clients want them to use AI and save a bunch of money. But, the firm both wants to make money by selling hours, but also wants to train lawyers. And we agreed that I'm having the same experience with research assistants now, which is, Claude and ChatGPT can do a lot of what I need done. The problem out there in the real world is that if you use AI in the place of first and second year or third year associates, you won't have any fourth year associates. Like, we have to keep training lawyers to be lawyers. And the technology is obviously changing with head-spinning speed. I mean, I'm experiencing that. We all are. But John's absolutely right. What it means to be a lawyer, and the part of being a lawyer I've always loved the best is like actually advising clients in trouble and being a sound judgment and knowing how to think through things. That's not going to change. And the tech may get really good at it or it may not. It may democratize the availability of law to people or it might not. But at some level, I think it's just too easy and we are all too quick to like drop everything and dash in a new direction. And we should definitely explore the new directions that's affected how I give exams, for example. But, at some level, you got to stay the course. You got to remember what it is to be a good lawyer and just start there and learn to be that good lawyer.
Very good advice. Did you all see that UVA law is going to require disclosure of how much AI is used in articles that are submitted? So I think that's the first of many such changes that we'll see. But thank you both for spending this time with us. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, we have additional podcast episodes with other thought leaders in the Academy that you can find on the Aspen Leading Edge podcast webpage or on your favorite podcast channels. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Patty. That was fun.